Initiating development with the knight offers flexibility, preparing to contest the center and potentially transpose into various popular openings. Establishing central influence and preparing for pawn expansion. This solidifies black's presence immediately. Solidifying central control and opening diagonals for future piece development. Developing the knight to its most natural outpost, reinforcing the center's influence while preparing for further piece activity. Challenging the central pawn structure immediately, opening lines and creating immediate imbalance. Solidifying the d-pawn and preparing for a potential e6 setup. This move opts for a robust queen's gambit decline structure. Solidifying the center's pawns and preparing development. This move prioritizes structural integrity over immediate aggression. Solidifying the center and preparing for bishop development. This move builds a robust pawn structure. Developing the bishop to target the kingside and prepare castling offers a solid foundation for white's position. Sacrificing central space opens lines for active pieces and challenges the pawn structure's integrity. Regaining the pawn instantly frees up your bishop and prepares for kingside castling, asserting control over the d4 square. Black boldly challenges white's central pawn structure, aiming for active piece play and potential queenside expansion by opening lines. Castling secures your king, a vital prerequisite for engaging in the upcoming central skirmish and consolidating your pieces. Developing the knight to c6 directly contests the center and prepares to challenge white's central pawn structure. Securing the queen behind the pawns prepares for central expansion while supporting the bishop's active square. Opening the central file now forces the queen to a more active, though potentially exposed, square, setting a dynamic tempo. Asserting influence over the open d-file becomes paramount now, aiming to disrupt black's developing pieces and potentially launch an attack. Developing the bishop to its natural square, the nascent kingside structure is now solidified, preparing for potential central action. Capturing the pawn opens the e-file for your rook, developing pressure towards black's king. Finally securing the king behind a pawn wall, the focus now shifts to central control and piece development. Developing the knight to its natural square solidifies the central pawn structure and prepares for further piece activity. Injecting a knight to b4 immediately challenges white's central control and opens aggressive lines. Stepping the knight to e5 boldly contests central squares and prepares for a potential queenside pawn push. Challenging white's central control, this knight prepares to leap to a more active square, potentially disrupting white's coordinated pieces. Introducing pressure on the knight, this maneuver aims to disrupt black's coordination and potentially open lines for an attack. Challenging the bishop's comfortable placement, this pawn advance aims to disrupt white's pieces and potentially gain queenside space. Shifting the bishop aims to disrupt black's central pawn structure and potentially prepare for a kingside attack. Fulfilling your defensive duty, the bishop prepares to rejoin the fray, reinforcing the central pawn chain and offering a clear escape square if needed. Striking the knight opens the e-file, potentially pressuring black's king while simplifying the position. Reclaiming the pawn with the knight immediately resolves positional tension, clearing the way for piece development. Opening the queenside diagonal with this exchange creates lasting weaknesses for black's pawn structure. Reclaiming the queen reestablishes material balance and opens a diagonal for the bishop, but the centralized knight now becomes a tempting target. This aggressive pawn thrust opens lines, but risks overextending the knight and creating weaknesses around the king. Trading the bishop for the knight creates immediate weaknesses around your monarch. Targeting black's weakened kingside, this bishop exchange aims to simplify while punishing the pawn structure's fragility. Repositioning the rook to the open e-file will allow for better piece coordination and pressure on white's central pawn structure. Re-establishing rook presence on the central file sharpens control and prepares for a potential pawn push. Asserting queenside presence offers a dynamic counterplay against the central pawn structure. Reclaiming the bishop solidifies control of the open central files and prepares for a potential kingside pawn storm. Reactivating the rook to the f-file offers a fresh offensive pathway. Reactivating the d-file, this aims to challenge black's rook and potentially create pressure on the queen side. Reclaiming the f-file with the rook aims to create counterplay against white's potentially exposed king. Reinforcing the kingside pawn structure and preparing to contest the crucial central files. King's safety now paramount, as the monarch steps away from the open diagonal and potential sacrifices. Shifting the queen to the d2 square initiates a regrouping, preparing for a potential advance along the d-file and bolstering the central pawn structure. A clever repositioning, subtly preparing to contest the d-file while evading further knight harassment. Rethinking the rook's role, this repositions for potential pressure on the king side, aiming to exploit the exposed black monarch. A valiant effort to stir up queenside activity, yet it potentially leaves your king exposed to the lurking threats. Shifting queen pressure across the board, forcing reevaluation of piece placement. The rook swings to the 6th rank, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure and contest the open file. The queen now eyeballs black's kingside defenses, aiming to exploit the open f-file. Bringing the bishop back to defend the pawn cluster, aiming to unblock the rook and improve its central position. Opening the queen's diagonal creates significant pressure on black's queenside coordination. Trading queens here resolves the immediate tactical storm, but the pawn structure remains permanently compromised. Clearing the path for the rook to penetrate the queenside, this exchange offers white a clear advantage in space. Reclaiming a bit of active space for the rook amidst this pawn-heavy landscape. Repositioning the rook to the open file aims to contest control and enhance its influence along that critical pathway. Initiating a queen sacrifice to unravel white's queenside pawns, a bold strategic gamble. A crucial trade is initiated, aiming to simplify into a favorable pawn structure for white. Re-establishing the rook on the 5th rank fortifies the position and prepares to contest the central files. Securing the open file with the rook swap simplifies the position, paving the way for potential endgame advantages. Suddenly, the doubled pawns create weaknesses around black's monarch, but also offer some central presence. Bringing the king into the center prepares for an active endgame role and potential pawn advances. Aggressively pushing pawns, black aims to gain space and potentially disrupt white's king safety, though it weakens the dark squares considerably. The monarch bravely advances, seeking queenside counterplay amidst the pawn congestion. Focusing the king toward the center is a sensible pursuit in this endgame transition, aiming to leverage its newfound activity. Activating the king is paramount now, centralizing it to potentially support advancing pawns and disrupt black's coordination. Shifting the king towards the center solidifies pawn protection and prepares for potential king activity in the upcoming endgame. Securing the d5 outpost with the bishop significantly improves piece activity and central control. Pushing the h-pawn is an aggressive attempt to create counterplay by dislodging white's bishop and opening lines towards the white king. Securing the kingside pawns with a simple advance prevents immediate pawn breaks and reinforces the position. Exploiting the open kingside, this thrust aims to shatter the pawn chain and create immediate attacking possibilities. Opening the h-file immediately addresses the queenside pawn majority's advance and prepares to exploit the newly created weakness. Opening the f-file is a significant concession, offering white a direct assault path towards your reshaped king. Opening the f-file decisively, this exchange immediately unleashes white's rook and promises dynamic play as the kings remain exposed. Opening the h-file grants your king a much-needed escape route, a crucial safety valve in this exposed position. Opening the kingside file with the pawn advance invites immediate tactical complications. The black king bravely advances, but this creates an exposed target for white's remaining pieces. Pioneering a pawn breakthrough offers queenside space and potential for an outside passer. The black king, now a powerhouse, advances to solidify its central presence and challenge white's pawn structure. King's central march begins, aiming to exploit the open diagonals and coordinate an attack. Controlling the central files is paramount now. Consider bringing the rook to the open line. Purging the dangerous bishop opens a crucial diagonal for the queen and initiates a favorable material conversion. Reclaiming central pawn control is vital, as white's bishop solidifies its dominance on the queen side. The white king ventures forward, seeking active participation in the endgame, but exposes itself to potential checks down the central files. Carving out space for the king on the queen side begins, aiming to avoid the encroaching pawns. Securing the queenside pawn majority becomes the immediate priority. Refocusing the king towards the queenside offers more safety and potential counterplay. King's rampage secures the pawn structure, turning a passive advantage into active winning potential. A desperate attempt to reanimate the kingside pawns, though the material deficit remains insurmountable. Reclaiming central influence and preparing to advance the pawns is a key objective now.